Hi everyone, my name is Brian Manternach. I use he, him pronouns. These are my affiliations on the screen. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Theater at the University of Utah, and I'm also a research associate for the Utah Center for Vocology, where I am on the faculty of the Summer Vocology Institute. So I'm very pleased to talk today about talking less and smiling more by adjusting feedback in the voice studio. Now, what I'm presenting today will be coming up in some upcoming publications of the Journal of Singing in the Independent Teacher column. So in March, we'll see the first part of this discussion, Talk Less, Smile More. And then in May, we'll get to the last portion, or the middle portion of this discussion on the benefits and downsides of vocal modeling. So if you want to look for those in the future, they'll be coming out soon. So here's the general outline of what we will cover today. I want to discuss and provide at least an overview on feedback, the feedback that we as teachers in particular give to our students during voice lessons in the studio. We're going to go through the stages of learning and see how that impacts the feedback that we give. We'll look at the usefulness of vocal modeling, as I just alluded to. Both the positive and potentially negative aspects of vocally modeling in a lesson. And then we'll look at the difference between learning or learning mode and performing mode, and understanding how our feedback as teachers might shift based on whether a student is in one of those modes versus the other. So you may recognize this title from the musical Hamilton, Talk Less, Smile More. So Aaron Burr was offering this free advice to a young, ambitious Alexander Hamilton. And Burr was trying to impart the wisdom that it might not be wise to let your adversaries know exactly your plans, exactly everything that it is that you are thinking. So he advised him to talk less, smile more, never let them know what you're against or what you're for. We as teachers might be able to take some lessons from that. So this 2013 Journal of Singing article by Lynn Maxfield, Improve Your Students' Learning by Improving Your Feedback, identifies and summarizes many of the terms and concepts related to feedback coming out of motor learning theory, motor learning research. So he identified a couple of types of feedback. Specifically, there is a kind of feedback that is available during a student's attempt. So that would be concurrent feedback. So while the student is singing, we say something like, drop your jaw, lift your soft palate. So feedback that is given during an attempt, concurrent feedback. There is also immediate feedback. So the feedback that might be provided immediately after a student sings something. And then delayed feedback. Delayed feedback could be a few seconds after the attempt when we offer feedback. It could be a significant amount of time, maybe even the next day when we offer feedback on an attempt. There are also the differences between inherent feedback and augmented feedback. So inherent feedback is what a student notices while they're singing. The internal sensations, feelings, vibrations, all the information they get about their singing through intrinsic sources. So what they feel, what they perceive, specifically while they're executing a task, in this case, singing. Augmented feedback then is any feedback that a student or a learner receives from an outside source. So many of us have mirrors in our studios. If a singer is watching themselves in the mirror while they're singing, they are visually getting augmented feedback. They're probably getting some kind of information by watching themselves in the mirror that they may not be able to feel inherently or through their intrinsic sources. Similarly, if a student is running a spectrogram program on a computer like Voce Vista or something like that, and they're watching the screen change in real time, that would be an example of concurrent augmented feedback, because the feedback is coming from an external source. And the concurrent would be it's happening at the same time. Augmented feedback can also be students listening to or watching recordings of their singing. They sing, they record it, they listen or watch it back, either immediately or in a delayed fashion, and that can also be considered augmented feedback because that will reveal things that they are probably not able to detect through inherent sources only. Now, importantly also, augmented feedback is primarily what we provide for our singers in our voice lessons, in the voice studio. So as teachers, we offer suggestions, critiques, comments, we ask questions. All of this constitutes augmented feedback as well. Now, in The Vocal Athlete by Wendy LeBorgne and Marcy Rosenberg, this third edition in particular, they discuss how the primary goal, the overarching goal, what we are trying to accomplish in voice lessons is essentially to build learner independence. We're trying to help our students essentially become their own teachers, to be so self-aware and knowledgeable about the process of singing, about their own instrument, that they are not dependent on our feedback, but they independently can lead themselves to their own improved function, greater artistry, all of that. Cara Reagan, in her wonderful book, A Systematic Approach to Voice, offers that teachers probably don't actually teach someone how to sing so much as we teach them how to practice. Or at least maybe that's what we should best focus on, is how to practice. Knowing that many of the great improvements, light bulb moments, aha moments, that often those happen when the student is singing on their own. Plus, they have so many more hours with their own voices than we do with them in the studio. So ideally, if we teach them how to practice well, how to practice with awareness, then they may be more likely to, once again, become independent learners and less dependent on teacher feedback. So the million-dollar question then for us as teachers is, how can we improve our feedback, specifically the augmented feedback we deliver in our lessons, in a way that will actually help build independence in our students, in the learners? So let's look at the 3 stages of learning. This comes from research undergone by Schmidt and Risberg, but it's applied to singing in a really great and accessible way in The Vocal Athlete by Wendy and Marcy. So the first stage of motor learning is called the verbal cognitive stage. And this is essentially when someone is learning a skill for the very first time. They're attempting it. So they're probably not going to be very good. Now, whether that's singing or whether that's bowling or throwing darts or any sort of skill, when you're brand new, you're going to fail a lot. That failing is actually a really crucial part of the learning process. So what the learner probably needs to do most when they are in this beginning process is put in a lot of attempts. They need a lot of repetition, and through those repetitions they're going to make a lot of mistakes. They're going to learn how to make different mistakes. They're going to make all kinds of errors in different ways. All of that provides them information, but we shouldn't expect them to be very good at it initially because they're just getting a feel for the skill. So as a teacher, when I have a student who is in this setting, what they probably need that will help them progress is frequent cueing. They need a lot of augmented feedback. So they might try a thing 2 or 3 times, and then we offer a suggestion. Then they try it a few more times, and we offer another adjustment. It's important, of course, not to bombard them with information and overwhelm them with too many things to do at once, but they do need that frequent repetition and frequent feedback in order to progress through this stage. I think it's significant that when it comes to singing, this is my own anecdotal reflection, that many people who don't identify as singers, who might be beginners, probably give up before they ever get out of this stage, right? They try it a few times, they say, oh, I guess I'm just not a good singer, after a few attempts, after a few failures, and then they just decide that I'm not a good singer. They act from a fixed mindset and anchor into that identity and never pursue it further. So all the more reason that when someone is just getting the hang of something, that we encourage them to just do it a lot and a lot. Offer them suggestions, encouragement, and allow them to keep finding their way. So jumping ahead from that first, the last stage of motor learning is called the automatic stage. And as the name indicates, this is where the skill that they're trying to execute is becoming automatic. So not only are they effective at and consistent in performing this skill, but they can do it with less cognitive effort, with less concentration. They don't have to think so hard about what it is that they're doing. They become, as it says on the screen, fast, fluid, and efficient at executing that skill. The other significant portion of the automatic stage is that they also have very quick error detection and self-correction. Another way to say that is they have built up their self-diagnosis skills. So on the occasion when they do attempt the skill and it doesn't go the way they had hoped, they probably, in the automatic stage, know why, and they probably know what to do in order to make a more successful attempt. So when learners are in this stage, the teacher may not need to do all that much. They have self-diagnosis skills built up, so they don't need a lot of feedback, they don't need a lot of cueing. So in this case, the teacher might be mostly unnecessary, maybe perhaps only needed for a check-in, or if the learner runs into a certain type of roadblock that they might need help working through. So that leaves our middle stage, the all-important motor learning stage, generally the longest stage of the learning process. So the students in this stage are no longer complete beginners. And we can tell because they're starting to get the hang of what it is they're trying to do. They're starting to become more consistent. They're starting to build some physical efficiency in the way that they're doing the skill. They might be able to start refining the skill as well, not just doing it, but doing it with greater precision. And then importantly, this is where they start to develop their self-diagnosis skills. If we're really, truly building student independence, learner independence, then that development of self-diagnosis skills is a crucial component. So as teachers, we can facilitate this by providing fewer answers. When they run into trouble, instead of just saying, oh, try this, or maybe do this instead, we might shift our focus to asking questions. What did you notice that time? What did it feel like that time? Okay, you just performed this 3 times. Which one felt the best? Which one felt the most efficient? Where in your body do you feel these sounds when it feels the best to you? So all of these leading questions encourage the learners building their self-diagnosis skills. And as we know from the research, the skills that a student discovers for themselves, even if the teacher leads them to the precipice of finding the solution that they're looking for, if they make that last leap and find the solution on their own, it is going to be more deeply embedded. Other studies have recognized that when a student is in this second stage of learning and a teacher provides an answer, rather than leading the student to their own conclusion, when we just give them the answer that they're looking for, it does improve performance in the moment, but it can harm their long-term learning because they didn't find it on their own. So this is written about extensively in The Vocal Athlete. I've also borrowed much from Lynn Helding and her writing, specifically her book, which I will cite in just a minute. So speaking of Lynn Helding, when her book, The Musician's Mind, came out around 2020, I interviewed her for Classical Singer, and there were some things that I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper that were intriguing to me about feedback, because they were sort of challenging to my idea of what I should be providing as a teacher. So I asked her this question on the screen. In Chapter 4, you caution that offering students too much feedback can create a dependency on their teachers. That may distract them from their own effort. Does this mean teachers, in a sense, might want to consider doing less teaching during lessons? And she said, sort of. A better way to express it would be that teachers should consider doing less talking during lessons. Talk less, smile more. She said, we have to let students experience the act of singing, and process it immediately after trying it. If teachers intervene at this very crucial, fertile moment when the student is processing what they just experienced, it is if they, the teachers, are saying, here, let me tell you how you felt that. So as she says, this is indeed less talking, but it can be profoundly good teaching. So once again, not devaluing their experience by us giving them our augmented feedback immediately, but allowing them to ponder, to consider, to come to their own solutions, conclusions, and helping them decide how to proceed. Once again, in the vocal athlete, Wendy and Marcy cite some of the research studies noted here about the potential danger of overcuing if we give too much information when someone is learning a task. They cite some of these studies where learners were given feedback after every 1 or 2 attempts at a skill, at performance. They did find in those situations that frequency of feedback did, once again, improve their performance, but again, it tended to promote learner dependency. Obviously, because the learners were not really encouraged to reach their own conclusions, to find their way through these roadblocks. Other studies found that when feedback was given between 50 and 100 times, so a student would execute a skill 50 to 100 times before any feedback was given, obviously no learner dependence was given. However, this may not allow for enough guidance, especially when we're looking at that first verbal cognitive stage of learning, where students tend to need more frequent feedback, cueing, and guidance. So really, what we should be aiming for is trying to find that Goldilocks zone of feedback. How much should I give? How little should I give? When should I give it? What form should I give it in? And they looked at this study in 1990 where the task was hitting baseballs, and they found that the greatest integration of that skill seemed to occur when feedback, augmented feedback, was given after 5 attempts. Now, perhaps that hitting a baseball is quite different from learning to sing, so maybe 5 is a good number. But if we're just mindful of how often should I intervene versus especially in that second stage of learning, how can I perhaps allow the student to create more attempts before I start to jump in, may once again lead to greater learning, more embedded learning. And in Lynn Maxfield's article that I cited earlier, he goes so far as to say that we might want to encourage students to assess their own performance whenever they're attempting the task, and then only request feedback when they need it. So maybe we only offer feedback if they actually ask for it. If they don't seem to need it, or if they're finding their way around, then maybe we just let them go. This might give us a greater window into how it is that they're practicing anyway. If lessons become sort of guided practice sessions as opposed to teacher-centered or teacher-led experiences. We also then, of course, have to be mindful that augmented feedback is not just our comments, not just our directions. It is anything that we do that might indicate how we feel about their performance. So if someone does something, a student performs and they do something really well, and we say, we give this great excited response, even if we don't say anything, that's already giving augmented feedback to the student. And if we do it either concurrently or immediately, then the student, again, had not had a chance to process their own thoughts about what happened. Similarly, our disapproval, or like if you scowl or frown or shake your head, that can be an indication of how we feel about something. So that part was hard for me to start to get used to in my own practice, because it feels like my job should be encouraging. And when a student does something for the first time, they make a discovery, or they start moving in the right track, that's exciting. And it makes me want to like celebrate immediately. And so I've had to maintain a poker face. And I explain this to them. I tell them that I'm not going to react until, right? I have to bring them into, I prefer to bring them into this process and say, okay, you're in this stage now, so I'm going to start to ask more questions. I'm going to really try to lead you to and encourage you to do more thoughtful reflection so that you can come to these conclusions on your own. So when something wonderful happens, then I try to keep that, and I ask them, and usually they, if it's as successful as I had anticipated or elicited that reaction from me, then usually they feel pretty good about it too. And that's when I can say, oh, I agree. I think that was really wonderful. And we can go from there. So it is not withholding praise, encouragement, those things that are wonderful to receive in a lesson, and let the student know that from our perspective too, yes, they're moving in the right direction, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't prioritize our feelings, that doesn't disallow their own self-assessment first. So let's talk about vocal modeling. So vocal modeling, vocal demonstration, essentially when a teacher performs in the lesson or sings as a way to instruct, right? Do it like this. Ah, whether it's a pattern, whether it's a specific technical aspect. Now this can be a really efficient, in the sense that it's really quick, way to elicit an improved performance. And certainly students of all genres need to hear vocal models of people who perform in those genres, so to inform them about what a professional sound in that genre might be. So they need to hear recordings of professional sound in that genre, and they probably need to hear live models. So if a teacher is proficient at creating the sounds of the genre that the student might be trying to build skill in, then to be able to provide some of those models in the lesson setting could be an advantage. Napoles and Vaquez Ramos suggest that teachers then should work on the sounds that they are modeling. So we should make sure that we are building the sounds that we intend to model, and as we ask our students to record their lessons and listen back to their singing, perhaps we should do that ourselves. In our warm-up and practice sessions, we should record ourselves making the sounds that we seem to be modeling or that we want to be modeling, and listen and analyze them ourselves, use our own augmented feedback on ourselves to determine if we are making the sounds sufficiently, efficiently, and in a way that we would actually want our students to emulate. Dr. Ka-Shing Hsu, in this article in the Journal of General Music Education, analyzed many studies related to vocal modeling and feedback, and found in a number of studies that when teachers were using vocal demonstration, vocal modeling for a specific purpose, in this case pitch matching, it was pitch matching for younger students in particular, they were more effective when they were using a lighter mechanism or a mode 2. So mode 2 registration. So this seems to indicate that if we are warming up or if we're modeling certain specific sounds, as I mentioned on the previous slide, not only should we practice those sounds on our own, but maybe at the beginning of a day of teaching, we should warm up our voices for the tasks that we might be modeling. So yes, we should practice them, but then on the day when we assume or expect that we might be using them, warm up our voices for those tasks so we can model more effectively or efficiently. Because other research studies have found that in order, obviously, to be effective, the modeling that we are providing has to actually be accurate. And there were some research studies, there's one particular where singers were provided models that were out of tune, vocal models that were out of tune, and the singers imitated the out of tune models that they heard, that they received. So once again, our modeling has to be accurate if it is to be effective, which might require us to practice and to warm up our voices for that particular modeling. Richard Miller wrote back in Solutions for Singers, the Solutions for Singers book that he wrote, that the purpose of modeling, the advantage of vocal modeling, lies in exhibiting a well-balanced spectrum, not in producing sounds for imitation. So as advanced learners, as more professional singers perhaps, that is one of the real advantages Miller feels students can take when we decide to model in our lessons, is they can hear the well-balanced spectrum that we produce and they can emulate that. as opposed to imitating the sounds of our voices. Michaela Kelly in the Journal of Singing writes that whenever we as teachers use our voices in modeling capacity, there is the potential risk that the student may simply imitate their teacher's voice. We can't know before we model exactly what it is, what aspect of what our students may be hearing they will decide to imitate or emulate. So for this reason, back in 2019 in a Nats chat with Kari Reagan, Scott McCoy admitted that he uses modeling sparingly, if at all, in his lessons for that very reason, to try to avoid the imitation component. As he said, "I do virtually no modeling. I'm 64 years old now. My students aren't 64 years old, and I really don't want my students listening to me and then trying to sing like a 64-year-old tenor. That's not who they are. And so if I just plain don't model, there's no risk of that. We use other methods." Itzhak Perlman relates the same idea. In the Perlman music program that he teaches master classes. He admits that he rarely demonstrates during those master classes because he knows he has some good students who have good ears and that they will just try to imitate the way that he is playing. And he says that I want, whenever they do something, to be their own because they figured it out. So once again, this idea that we can lead them to their own discoveries as opposed to providing them the answer. In this case, vocal modeling might feel like providing an answer. In my own book, Voices of Influence, I tell the story of a colleague I had when I was a graduate student who had a teacher who was an active performer. And so because this teacher had such a demanding performance schedule, when he had performances upcoming, he would take it easy on his voice during vocal lessons when he was teaching so that he wouldn't engage in too heavy of a vocal load before having to go to a rehearsal or performance. And one of the ways that he saved his vocal capacities was not to model. So on those days when he was saving his voice, he wouldn't do any vocal modeling during lessons. My colleague, my classmate, who was of the same voice type of that teacher, admitted that he's just not as good of a teacher when he doesn't demonstrate. So that could be indicative of perhaps a dependency growing between teacher and student if when the teacher chooses not to model, the quality of his instruction is deemed to be lower. So to that end, if we as teachers rely too heavily on vocal modeling, it could put us at a disadvantage in all those times when our voices might not be in tip-top shape. Of course, there is natural vocal fluctuation throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout hormonal changes, throughout our schedules. Of course, everyone goes through periods of vocal illness or perhaps even experiences vocal injury where we are not able to do the same things that we were. And of course, all of us, hopefully, experience age-related changes as we go through life, inevitably. I shouldn't say hopefully. Hopefully that we live long enough to get to the point where we actually experience age-related changes in our voice. And so that one in particular strikes me because as teachers, it is a skill we can continue developing throughout our lives. And so as we get to our later years, we should be reaping the benefits of our lifetime and career lifetime of experiences as teachers. But if our teaching relies too heavily on vocal modeling, when we get to those golden years of instruction, if we are no longer able to vocally model in the same way we did when we were younger because our voices are in a different condition, then that again would mean the quality of our instruction would probably be lower just at the time when it should perhaps be our best. I also encourage folks to be aware of what I've started calling call and response teaching, which seems to be very often used on TikTok videos. I've found this to be a TikTok teacher tactic. Call and response is as it seems, where a teacher says, sing it like this, ah, and the student goes, ah, and the teacher says, no, 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 like this, ah, and the student goes, ah, and they kind of go back and forth that way, where it's just sort of call and response. And though that might be useful in certain situations, often as I see it on social media, not to pick on TikTok in particular, but as I see it in social media, these recorded lessons are often masterclass settings, and so sometimes they are in group settings, and often when the teacher demonstrates, it's often a quite impressive sound that elicits nods and approval and astonishment sometimes from the audience, which always just makes me wonder, who is that modeling actually for? Is it so the teacher can demonstrate that they can do the thing, or is it actually useful in the moment in helping the student reach a desired outcome? Now, I can't know, but that's something that is always in my mind when I hear modeling used, often in these sorts of settings. Lita Scarce, who works at the Duke University Voice Care Center, in her book Manual of Singing Voice Rehabilitation, also points to some vocal health issues that can come up if we are using vocal modeling too much. Like the teacher that I mentioned before, she, in this section called Unloading Unnecessary Voice Use, cautions teachers and advises us to perhaps be more conservative in the modeling, so using it less often in rehearsals and in voice lessons. So we should encourage singers to explore the ways in which technical adjustments can be elicited with verbal cues and description, rather than having them depend on us doing it for them, demonstrating it for them. And so she says, if you have students who require a lot of modeling, consider, and I love this idea, consider recording yourself doing the thing, giving the model, and then use a playback for subsequent demonstration. So in this way, you could even create an entire library of your own vocal modeling of different sounds, of different techniques, in different keys, for different voice types perhaps. In that case then, you have the advantage as the teacher, just like with a self-tape for an audition. You can record it as many times as necessary to create the sound in a way that you feel elicits what it is that you're trying to portray, or what it is you hope the student to emulate. And then you can have that library. It takes the pressure off of you to have to do it in the moment in a way that is perfect and effective for the student. But also can lower the vocal load, especially in long days of teaching. Back to the vocal athlete, Wendy and Marcy say that vocal modeling should be used primarily during those early stages of acquisition of a specific skill. So again, that first stage of learning where students need to be doing the thing a lot and teachers need to be providing a lot of feedback. This could be the kind of feedback that we might offer during that first stage of learning, because that's again where we're providing answers. We're not necessarily asking questions. We're helping them establish the foundations of the skill. But then they recommend that modeling should be faded then as the student becomes more experienced with the skill. So as they get into that second and third stage of learning. They also suggest using modeling as we would delayed feedback, something that Lynn Maxfield also encourages in the 2013 Journal of Singing article, is to have the student pause for several seconds. So we can model, have them pause and process what it was that they heard, perhaps consider what element of that model am I looking to emulate, hopefully not imitate, but emulate, before they try it themselves. But as teachers, they also encourage us to always be considering, is there another approach I can use? Is there another way to have this student experience the sound rather than having a requirement of me providing it for them? Understanding, of course, that experiential learning, learning by doing, will be more likely to result in the student actually integrating this procedural skill. Michaela Kelly also indicates that creating space in the voice studio for a student-centered approach can guide students towards autonomy rather than dependency on their teachers for feedback or as a model to imitate. So there's much greater focus in recent Journal of Singing articles, in recent Nats Books publications and others, focusing on student-centered learning, perhaps moving away from a master-apprentice model. And so more judicious and probably less frequent use of modeling may actually be, according to Dr. Kelly, a more student-centered approach towards teaching in the voice studio. So lastly, the final section here is pulled directly from Lynn Helding, both from her book and from this article, Stop Teaching and Other Graduation Advice, where she identifies, pulling once again, as she does so astutely from the motor learning research, identifying the difference between learning and performing. So when we are learning, that is necessarily messy. That is unstable. It is making a lot of mistakes. It is trying things in different ways. It is wobbly, as she says, and that's what it must be. That's what learning must be. Performing, however, is when we don't want to be unstable, messy, wobbly. This is where we want to show the best that we can do in a given moment. She talks about it as being a snapshot in time. This is the best we can do based on our current skill sets on a given day. So learning versus performing are very different things. As she said then, we as teachers and our students should be very clear during lessons whether they are in learning mode or performance mode. As she says, the arena for messy experimentation is not the stage, but the voice studio. So when someone is in learning mode, we should encourage the experimentation. But when we're in performance mode, when they're getting ready for a performance, our further instruction might destabilize and make messy the choices that they're making right at the time when they should be locking in their choices so that they can deliver the most consistent, successful, indicative of their current skill level performance. So her advice then is a few days before a performance, or even as many as a few weeks before a performance, scale back your instruction to 0. So in other words, as she says, stop teaching. No more augmented feedback designed to lead to changes in their performance, other than perhaps encouragements, reinforcements of what they're doing, helping them understand that their own preparation has prepared them for this, their own efforts has prepared them for this performance. So, of course, augmented feedback, thoughtful, constructive, informed augmented feedback from conscientious teachers is an essential component of voice lessons, is an essential component of learning a higher order skill like cultivated singing. It is necessary for the vocal progress of students. However, students may actually benefit more when some of our feedback is either adjusted, such as finding that Goldilocks amount, how many comments, how much augmented feedback do they need, perhaps only once in every 5 attempts, once they are in that second stage of learning, or when our feedback is temporarily withheld. So that can be, even though I think I know exactly what will lead you to the solution for this problem you're experiencing, maybe asking a question to help them self-analyze and develop their own self-diagnosis skills will be more beneficial in the moment. That could also, temporarily withholding, might be more limited use of modeling. So we are again leading them to what their voice does rather than simply demonstrating what ours do. Or times when feedback might be halted altogether, such as when students are in performance mode rather than learning mode, so that we are not encouraging a destabilization of those technical and artistic choices that they are making. So in other words, we might consider listening to Lynn, Maxfield that is, and encourage students to assess their own performance and then only request feedback when and if they need it. We may also listen to Lynn, Helding, that is, and knowing when to simply stop teaching, knowing when our augmented feedback is not helping the situation. And we may also consider listening to Lynn, Manuel Miranda, that is, and simply talk less, smile more. Thank you for your attention.